Hi, I'm Marc Sievers, and welcome to From My Kitchen to Yours. Time around the holidays can be scarce, and with Thanksgiving fast approaching, I have a simple and easy solution. Today I'm going to show you how to make my French Savory Tart with caramelized onions and a seasoned rosemary crust. It checks all the boxes for chic and delicious holiday entertaining. It's impressive, inexpensive, easy to make, and it can be made in advance. I have my ingredients prepped, so let's get started. So I like to make this tart in the days leading up to Thanksgiving because it has three specific uses. I'll serve it the night before Thanksgiving with a simple salad and a bowl of soup so that my kitchen stays nice and pristine. Or I'll serve it the next day at Thanksgiving as part of an hors d'oeuvre or a buffet. I love it because it doesn't get your guests full before the big meal, but it gives them a little something to nibble on with some champagne or a glass of wine. Or I'll serve it the next day after Thanksgiving for my overnight guests when I don't want to be in the kitchen anymore. They don't want to see me in the kitchen anymore, but we need to have a little nosh for breakfast. So you may not think of a French tart as being something simple and easy, but I'm going to show you how to make all of the components and how quickly they actually do come together. And once you master the crust and the filling, you can really turn both of those components into so many different things, both savory and sweet. So first, let me get started with the crust. So that's 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So this is going to have a little bit of a seasoned twist to it. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of just regular sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, and then for my 2 secret ingredients, 1/2 teaspoon of white pepper. White pepper is going to give it just a little bit of spice. It's not going to overpower anything, but it's going to give you this little lovely seasoned scent of pepper. It's lovely. My other secret ingredient is rosemary. So rosemary is used a lot in French cooking, and rosemary leaves are a little bit tough, so you do want to mince them as finely as you can. And I'm going to put 1 tablespoon of fresh rosemary. So next, I'm going to add butter. And I have a stick of very cold, unsalted butter. And the best way to put butter into your flour is actually to dice it up. So do this rather quickly because the colder the ingredients, the better your pastry dough is going to turn out. So just a quick little dice. So far, so simple. And you'll notice that I'm putting this into a glass bowl. If you've read some of my previous recipes, I've used a food processor. But I wanted to take this back to kind of the simple way of doing things without a lot of electronic equipment. So I'm going to use a pastry blender. Growing up, my nan didn't have a pastry blender, and she used to take 2 butter knives and she used to slice it back and forth, and she would rotate the bowl and keep going until all of the butter was broken up. And while that's lovely, I'm going to use a pastry blender. So my goal here is to really just mix all of those ingredients up and to break up the butter into pea-sized pieces. So it takes a little bit of muscle power. I hope you can't see them bulging from my shirt. And every once in a while, you want to pick up your blender, and you'll see that the butter is stuck to the bottom. And very carefully, just run your finger around to loosen up the butter. And then I like to press it through the pastry blender itself, just to make sure that everything's getting incorporated. And then I'm going to keep going until it resembles the size of peas. You'll also notice that I didn't put any shortening in my crust. This is an all butter crust. And my reasoning is I actually like the density of this crust for this tart. And I don't always have cold vegetable shortening in the fridge. So if you're watching this at home and you don't have any vegetable shortening, you have no excuse not to make it. Haha, I got ya. So as you can see, the butter is pretty well broken up into little bits here, and I'm just gonna mix it around just a bit. So my next thing is gonna be ice cold water. And I'm gonna use 8 tablespoons, which is just under a half a cup. And I have extra water here because I'm gonna make another crust. That's perfect. So now, cup your hand, just like this, and just go in there and gently mix it around, just using your fingertips and lightly. You're not really trying to compact anything, you're just trying to get the water evenly distributed in and around all that butter and flour. And it's gonna look kind of shaggy, like it's not coming together, but it's actually going to be blended in a really unique way in just a minute. So now I'm gonna get some extra flour here. I'm just gonna lightly flour my board. And I'm gonna dump this mess onto my counter. Put that aside. So my goal now is to really form this into a ball first, and just work rather quickly. Perfect. So now we're going to blend this. And I want to make sure that all of the butter is evenly distributed throughout the dough. So this is going to be a technique that maybe you've seen, maybe you haven't, but take the heel of your hand, not the palm, the heel of your hand, because that's going to be the coldest part of your hand. And in little increments, I'm going to quickly brush off the dough onto the counter to blend the butter. So I'll show you. So take it and do just like that. And you can see all of the butter there is really getting well blended. So you want to do this quite quickly, all the way down, and then bring it back up. And as you're doing it, you can really hear the butter too. You can hear the butter against against the heel of your hand getting all blended. And then you'll see that the dough becomes much stickier because the butter has been blended perfectly. So I'm going to wrap it into some wax paper, and I'm going to put this in the fridge for 30 minutes. And then up next is the caramelization of those delicious onions. So my pie dough is chilling in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes, and I've moved on to the caramelization of my onions. So I have a large saute pan set over medium-low heat, and I have 3 tablespoons of butter and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And to that, I'm going to add 4 cups of thinly sliced onions. In go my onions. Now this is more than 4 cups of onions because I'm going to demonstrate 2 different tarts for you. But your recipe is going to be 4 cups of onions, half a teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of freshly cracked black pepper. I need a generous pinch of sugar, but the sugar is really going to help caramelize these onions. I'm going to set the timer for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to check on them every few minutes. And I'm looking for really deep golden brown, very soft onions that have really cooked down. All of this is going to cook down to a very little amount. You'll be very surprised. So while these are cooking, I'm going to move on to getting my custard ready. So my onions are caramelizing behind me. My pastry dough is chilling in the fridge. So I'm going to take this minute to make my custard for the tart. Custard is really simple. I need 1 cup of heavy cream. Perfect. I need 4 extra large eggs. A half a teaspoon of salt. I'm seasoning everything as I'm going along, and everything is getting a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper so that everything is really well seasoned and you're not trying to season at the end. And 3/4 of a teaspoon of freshly cracked black pepper. So my last ingredient in my custard is nutmeg. I happen to love freshly grated nutmeg, and if you've never seen a nutmeg pod, or is this little, very hard thing that smells like nutmeg. So I'm going to put in about 3/4 of a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. You can also use regular ground nutmeg from your spice cabinet. I just think that the freshly grated nutmeg gives it a little bit more of a roundness and flavor. That is perfect. Little whisk. And gradually whisk up your eggs and cream carefully so it doesn't splash you in the face. And you want to whisk it enough so that the egg white and the egg yolk are fully incorporated into the cream. You'll be able to tell because that's still too thick. You can see that when I lift up my whisk, you'll feel a resistance to it. So you want to mix it up just a little bit more. And now it's perfect. Next, I'm going to show you how to roll out your pastry dough. Now it's on to rolling out the dough. Don't be scared. I don't know why everyone is mystified by this, but it's really simple. So take some flour, and you want to evenly distribute it on your board. And the best way to do that is to use the little flick of your wrist. And that gets a nice coating of flour all over your board. It's much better than doing this. See, that's not very French. I'm going to butter my tart pan, just very lightly, maybe a teaspoon or so of butter. I like to butter things with my hands. You can really work in the butter into those little crevices of the pan. You want to make sure that your pastry, once it's baked, comes out. There's no sense in going through all of this effort if it's stuck in your pan. All right, so slip the bottom back in. I'm going to lightly flour my rolling pin. Just put a little dusting of flour on the top. So the best way to roll out your pastry dough is to really start in the center and using a little bit of pressure. And notice how I'm not going all the way over and all the way back. That's gonna, if you do that, you'll end up rolling the edges of your dough a little thinner than the rest of it. So I flip it, and then, you see, I roll it this way. And those ends end up getting the same thickness as the rest. And you want to, the key to rolling out your dough is to really keep it moving. So every time you roll it out, turn it. A little bit more flour if you need it. You can really, in this dough, you can really see the flecks of the bright green rosemary, and you can even see the butter. That means it's going to be good. Every once in a while, just reflour your rolling pin if you have to. So I want my dough to be about 1/8 of an inch thick. Perfect. 2 ways of getting your pastry dough from your board into your tart pan. You can do the traditional way, which is roll it up on itself, or you can fold it actually in quarters. And then place it on 1/4 of the pan, and then unroll it. See that? Nice and simple. To get the perfect fluted edge and the really nice top and sides here, you want to lift start to lift the dough and gently press it into the pan. You don't want to stretch your dough or pull on it too much because it'll actually spring back. So gradually make your way around. And I'm just pressing it gently in place. And then to get a nice even top, take your rolling pin and you roll right across the top of the pan. That cuts the excess dough. And roll it the other way. And there's your perfect pie shell. That looks great. So we're going to prepare this now to bake it. And I'm going to use a simple piece of tin foil. I'm going to gently place it into my tart pan very gently. And I'm going to fill this with either pie weights or just plain dried beans. And what this is going to do, this is a very intricate part. You want to spread the beans right out to the end of the tart because this prevents the sides of the tart from falling once it's baking. This is going to help keep the tart its signature tart shape. There you go. I'm going to put this into the refrigerator while I'm still waiting for my onions to caramelize. If you don't have a tart pan, I told you there was another way of doing this. And I found that a springform pan and a cake pan set into one another so that there's about a 1/2 inch gap all the way around works perfectly. This is going to give you a little bit more of a free-form, let's call it rustic look. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to butter the bottom and the sides of the springform pan. And then I'm going to butter the outside of my cake pan. Because unlike the beans that I have in the other one to weigh it down, this is what's going to weigh the sides down. Unwrap it. And if you find that when you take the dough out of the fridge, if it's really, really hard, you can loosen it up a little bit by just banging it with your rolling pin. And that just kind of breaks it up a little bit and makes it a little bit easier for you to use. So this one, same technique of rolling it out. And we're going to roll this out to be, again, about 1/8 of an inch thick. Fold it over again into quarters. I'm going to set it aside for just a minute. And what I want to do is place it into a quarter, just like we did the tart shell. Unfold it. This one takes a little bit more patience than the tart shell because this one is going to want to fall into itself. So now I'm going to gently fold it into place. And the goal here is to not have any dough overhanging on the top of this tin. There you are. So don't forget to prick the bottom of it with your tines of your fork. And then your buttered cake pan literally fits like a bug in a rug down inside. So you can see that the walls of the cake pan that's in the center is going to support the dough that's lining the springform pan from caving in. So my oven is at 400 degrees, and I'm going to par bake these shells to prevent them from having the soggy bottom. So I'm going to put them both into the oven. It's very hot. And I'm going to bake them at 400 degrees for 20 minutes. And then after 20 minutes, I'm going to remove the foil and beans, and I'm going to remove the other cake pan that's inserted. I'm going to re-prick the bottom with my fork just a few times, and I'm going to return them back to the oven for another 15 minutes. Okay, so these have finished with their par baking. Now it's time to assemble them and put them in the oven for the last time. So I'm going to put a layer of caramelized onions on the bottom. So I want to create a nice single layer of these caramelized onions. So I'm going to pour the custard in very slowly and nice and evenly going around, following the shape of the tart. Depending on if your tart has shrunk, which mine has not, so this is perfect. This one I'm going to garnish. And I've got some beautiful thin slices of red onion, very thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to garnish my tart before I bake it. I've got 5 ounces of goat cheese that I'm going to sprinkle evenly all over the tart and the onions. There we go. This one is all nicely decorated and ready to be baked. I'm going to very gingerly place it off to the side. This happens to be my favorite one because I love I'll pick it up very gently, but I love the rough edges this has. It's just so homemade looking and it's so beautiful. And this one I'm going to do a little bit differently. I'm just going to do the caramelized onions and the custard. So I'm going to put in my layer of caramelized onions. Give my custard a little mix. And then I'm going to slowly pour this custard in as well. If you are pouring the custard in, it looks like it may go over the side. You don't have to use all of the custard, so I'm going to stop there. I probably have just a few tablespoons left, but that's okay. It's not going to affect the way that it cooks or bakes. Into my hot oven goes my more rustic one. Very carefully into the oven. Ha, no spilling. Gently place it in. And these are going to bake for about 25 to 35 minutes until they're nicely golden brown on top and the crust is perfectly crisp. So now it's time for the unveiling. So I have my traditional tart pan with my caramelized onion and goat cheese tart. And I think kind of a really special way to take it out of the pan is setting a little bowl onto something and then putting your tart right in the center and removing the ring. Isn't that so cool? I just love that. Kind of like magic. And then I'm going to put this one on a beautiful white pedestal so you can see that the top, the goat cheese has gotten a little bit of browned and the onions have cooked, those beautiful red onions. So this one is going to get brought right onto the pedestal. And then the second version of this tart, my favorite, is this rustic chic one with those rough edges. And this one, you just undo the latch of your springform pan and remove the ring. And I like to leave it on the bottom of the pan. And then I'm going to garnish this with just a very, very simple sprig of rosemary. I love just the simplicity of that. Adds a little pop of color, and it lets everyone know that there's rosemary in it. My French Savory Tart is a great way to save time and elevate your holiday entertaining menu. You can get all the written recipes at marksievers.com. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend time with me in my kitchen. And remember, eat well, laugh often, and share the love. Happy Thanksgiving and have a delicious day.